Good morning. Okay, so my friend Philip Roberts, whenever he speaks, he does this exercise that helps him relax. So I'm going to do that right now. And if you would join me, I think that it would help us all feel better. So can everybody stand up, please? Okay, so we're halfway through the morning. You got your coffee, but in order to get alert, you need to stretch, like all the way up. Stretch. Get the blood going. Maybe say hi to the person next to you. Hi. Hi. Okay. All right, you can sit down now. There's not a chair up here, so I don't get to sit down. But, okay. So, like Jane said, I'm Jenn, and I'm a writer trained as a journalist working in tech. Also, once on Tinder, someone sent me a message that said, "Sweet face, INFJ chick." And because I'm me, that gave me an idea for the theme for my slides. So, I'm sorry. I've been active in the JavaScript and Node communities for the past 4 years. It was actually at this event 3 years ago where I spoke at my very first tech conference ever, so I love Cascadia. Yay! And I gave a talk about emotional safety at a developer conference, so it was really easy and smooth. I also met Jan Leonard, who's one of the creators of the Hoodie project that I'm here today to talk to you about. Also, my project mate, Gregor, talked about Hoodie on Wednesday. But if you missed it, Hoodie is an open source project focused on building a certain type of technology to a desired effect. That's a pretty vague description, but for the purposes of my talk, that's okay, because I want to talk about open source in general. So let's begin. If you can, remove yourself from the tech bubble of the way that things are, and think about the concept of just like the flat concept of open source. On one side of the coin, you have people coming together, not motivated by money or recognition, to use their abilities to create something for, let's just say, the greater good, or, let me see. I lost my notes. Okay. So people coming together to use their abilities for the greater good or for the other people in their field. On the other side of that coin, however, you have people investing their time, sharing their ideas, and not being paid for their efforts. So there's a lot of potential for manipulation and unhealthy cultures to take hold there. What kind of system is this? Who would do that? So it turns out a lot of people. In a talk last year, Ben Balter looked at the licensed open source projects on GitHub and found that about 10 million users are working on around 25 million projects, which makes sense if you think about how many people are involved and jump in and out of different projects. And that's just the stuff hosted on GitHub. The idea of open source, or this ritual of sharing technological information, was happening long before software development. The early auto industry is a good example of this. The original creator of the two-cycle gasoline engine patent was owned by one group, and that allowed for them to pretty much dominate the industry. Up until the patent was challenged and won by the now famous automaker Henry Ford, and a more collaborative and open approach to automaking was established by the creation of the Motor Vehicle Manufacturers Association. It's a long one. This collaboration by would-be competitors, that's a little cameo of my friend Carolina. This collaboration by would-be competitors has had all sorts of really positive and far-reaching benefits, like creating a structure for fair competition in the industry, then all the way up through today's age, and their involvement as the now Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, which allows automobiles to act as an advocacy group for the automobile industry and public policy issues. And this is a pretty great thing, unless you look too closely into their stances on the whole regulating greenhouse gas emissions and environmentalism thing. But we're not going to do that today. Open source development as we know it began as a collaborative effort between individuals and another information sharing industry, which was education. The majority of software originally created in the 1950s and 60s was done through university students and old school hardware company researchers coming together to create public domain software. Let's see. Okay. And because it was created within the realm of academics and research, it was distributed under the principles of openness and cooperation, which have long been established in the fields of academia. So some time passes, and there's this huge lawsuit in 1969 where the US Department of Justice charged IBM with destroying businesses by bundling their free software with the IBM hardware. As a result of this suit, IBM unbundled its software. That is, software became independent products separate from hardware, and this really set the stage for software as its own product, whether privatized or in open source. So more time passes, and eventually we get projects like GNU, Linux, the origins of FreeBSD, Red Hat, Apache. I'm sorry, this is just not that exciting to me personally. But if you are interested in it, I would encourage you to check out Wikipedia, where you can find open information for free. So, getting back to open source today, how has the world benefited from open source? Open Source for America lists the top benefits as being choice. So the source code of open source software is available to all, meaning that no one company owns the software. Another benefit is reliability. Open source software is peer-reviewed, and that leads it to be more reliable and robust. The third is security. Having your source code out there enables anyone to examine software for security flaws. And the fourth benefit is fast deployment. Okay, this is just a list of the technical benefits, actually. So those are clearly aimed at the tech industry. And arguably, open source primarily benefits software and hardware developers and probably their investors, but LOL, JK. But not really, because they do. So it gives them tools to create the technologies that we see in action today. A lot of other things are open source too, for example, Wikipedia, like I just mentioned. Tools we use often have open source alternatives available, and not just for linting or giving you a pretty terminal to code from. To-do lists, video and music editing software, writing software, visual arts-based software, bringing your appliances to life via the Internet of Things software, you name it, someone has probably created their own open source version of a project or product that you can now create something pretty cool with. In fact, open source is so prevalent now that Black Duck Software, an open source logistics provider, found in a recent study that 78% of businesses use some sort of open source software. And that's as in businesses worldwide. So we're living in a time where open source is literally everywhere. Those are all my listening faces. This open movement, this information sharing paradigm, has the potential to touch areas like education, government, healthcare, even money. Open source, much like the internet itself where it lives, has the potential to be a game-changing equalizer for people. And that's pretty exciting, so that's my excited face. I think I'm saying ba-ba-ba-ba, exciting. Okay, so if this open movement of open sourcing things is actually the way of the future, let's look at the industry and the community of folks currently operating it. Oh boy. Has there ever been an industry that you know of where 99% of the attention, investment, education, career development, recognition, or hero worship has been focused on a singular role within that industry? Think about it. She'll wait. If you think about it, even doctors have nurses. But in tech, you're either an engineer, developer, programmer, coder, or you're what? A non-coder, a normal, an overhead position, or you work in marketing, or my favorite, a soft skills worker. I've been called that. It's a strange dynamic when you think about it. Remember talking about the automotive industry earlier? Let's take that and look at it if what's happening in tech right now is happening in the automotive industry. So here we go. An engineer creates an engine. This engine is going to power a car that will move people through time and space. Gosh, it would be so cool if you could move a lot of people, so you should build a lot of cars. You'd better hire more engineers to build some engines. But, what about the rest of the car? I mean, you can't iterate when it comes to safety. I mean, we have, but it's certainly not best practice in the auto industry anymore. When it comes to tech, we take a weird and backwards approach to things. Sure, maybe you have some engineers on your team who specialize in transmissions or camshafts or differentials even, but the closer you get to releasing your car, you realize you have no one working on steering. That seems important. Or what's the other one part of the car? Oh gosh. Brakes, yes, those. Gosh, but you're so close to release. I mean, your car is only missing those important-ish parts. And also all of the body work, so you can tell it's a car. Also, you're gonna have to sell all these cars. Who on the team is going to do that? You know what? Let's not worry about any of that. When this car is done, it'll be such a great car that it will sell itself. You'll see. Actually, you know what might work instead is if we just sell this part of the car to another automaker. We'll be the go-to engine people. Our niche will be revolutionary. Now let's apply to some conferences and talk about this. And that might sound funny, but it's an approach we see to tech and open source products every day. I hear story after story about the developers behind the projects being rock stars, ninjas, and pirates. Wait, are there pirates? No, there are not pirates yet. You never hear about the intuitive or personable salesperson who's literally saved everyone's butts and their paychecks by doing the hard work of selling the dang thing. Or the customer support person that doesn't take a customer's frustrated feedback personal, but is able to meet them in the middle and still communicate to cooperatively really reach a solution. Where are all those stories? How come those people don't get Ks of followers on Twitter? Coding is hard, I'll give you that. But, let's see. But finding solutions to hard problems isn't isolated to the terminal. Other industries have figured out how to do this better. The healthcare industry, for example, has well documented their journey from what I'm sure were the rock star years of doctors to now adopting a model for interdisciplinary collaboration. And what is that? It's exactly what it sounds. Professionals of different disciplines working in the same field, in this case, the healthcare industry, coming together to collaborate. So I'm going to read a little case study about that. Oliver Robinson, an elderly woman confined to a wheelchair, has spent several Thanksgivings holidays in a nursing home. The food was bland, the setting was sterile, and although friendly, most of the people around her were not her family. This year is different. For the first time in years, Robinson, age 74, is hosting her own Thanksgiving dinner. For this remarkable occasion, Robinson has invited family and friends to her new apartment in Philadelphia to share turkey, stuffing, and all of the homemade fixings she can cook up in the days ahead. What has made the difference here? She joined LIFE, or Living Independently for Elders, which is a healthcare center in Philadelphia that helps low-income, frail, or chronically ill older adults live on their own. Prior to her move, LIFE's team of physical and occupational therapists taught her how to get into bed, clean up and take a bath, and assessed her new apartment to ensure that it was wheelchair ready. At LIFE, Robinson gets the kind of holistic support that cannot be provided by a single profession. And the benefits of this kind of teamwork are incalculable. I can basically do what I want and I'm happy, Robinson says. I don't have to depend on anyone. Owned and operated by the School of Nursing at the University of Pennsylvania and led by nurse practitioners, LIFE employs physicians, speech, occupational, and physical therapists, social workers, dietitians, nurses' aides, drivers, and others. Its successful model of interdisciplinary collaboration was highlighted in a groundbreaking report on the future of nursing. The report called for a radical transformation of the nursing profession to meet increasing demands for healthcare at a time of significant demographic and health system changes. One key way to do that was to enhance interdisciplinary collaboration and coordination in healthcare. Healthcare professionals currently operate in separate spheres, but studies show that if they break down the walls of the hierarchical silos and come together as a team, as is the case with life, they will improve safety and quality of patient care. And how is this accomplished? In the case with healthcare, it's education. To break down those walls, health professionals must begin working together before they actually start working. The findings of the report called on universities and training programs to expand interdisciplinary educational opportunities and programs to help foster collaboration among students before they entered the health workforce. So I hate to say this because I know folks, especially here, are passionate about tech, but if the people involved in the much higher stakes and certainly higher pressure positions in the healthcare field can come together and recognize the value of each other's skill sets and collaborate across disciplines, there's basically no excuse for how we have things set up right now. Let's see. Another example coming from open source's own origins in academia is the instance of the Department of Journalism at Ball University's efforts to bring library professionals and faculty together to create a more robust introductory journalism research course for undergraduates. And that led to a practical consideration of interdisciplinary collaboration, and they created their own conceptual model for this. So their results are as follows. Post-secondary educators want students ready for an integrated marketplace. Programs of study require students to complete coursework outside of their chosen major. Experiential, immersive, and/or service learning are topics of discussion at conferences about college teaching. It seems that, as educators, we recognize the globalization of society and the overlapping nature of most occupations. And we want our students to have diverse interdisciplinary experiences. Thus, it seems prudent to adopt a similar mindset for our own scholarly endeavors. We should set an example for our students, valuing efforts to reach across the aisle and emphasizing interdisciplinary opportunities. And our final example comes from everyone's favorite example of an ideal creative collaborative workplace, which is Pixar. And Pixar, if you're unfamiliar, is the production studio responsible for Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Monsters, Inc. There are many, many, many movies that this little person adores. And these movies aren't loved just by people the world over. They're critically acclaimed and have won many of the highest awards given in the industry, which is the Academy Awards. Pixar is somewhat of a creative anomaly in that they're able to consistently reproduce conditions across a large team to a highly successful, both commercially and critical effect. How is this accomplished? Founder Ed Catmull wrote an amazing book, which I highly recommend, called Creativity, Inc. But anyway, he described his thoughts on their approach to a creative collaboration and team leadership here. What does it take for a director to be a successful leader in this environment? Of course, our directors have to be masters at knowing how to tell a story that will translate into the medium of film. This means that they must have a unifying vision, one that will give coherence to the thousands of ideas that go into a movie, and they must be able to turn that vision into clear directives that the staff can implement. They must set people up for success by giving them all the information they need to do the job without telling them how to do it. Each person on the film should be given creative ownership of even the smallest task. Good directors not only possess strong analytical skills themselves, but can harness the analytical power and life experiences of their staff members. They are superb listeners and strive to understand the thinking behind every suggestion. They appreciate all contributions, regardless of where or from whom they originate, and they use only the best ones. In her observation of this dynamic in action, the researcher Linda Hall stated, "What we know is that at the heart of innovation is a paradox. You have to unleash talents and passions of many people, and you have to harness them into work that is actually useful. Innovation is a journey. It's a type of collaborative problem solving, usually among people who have different expertise and differing points of view." Which brings us to Hoodie, my friend Gregor. It's a fairly young project, Hoodie is. It was created in 2013 by Gregor and Jan, who I mentioned earlier. At Hoodie, we build software like other open source projects, But we are different in that we say we aim to be one of open source's most diverse and inclusive communities. That inclusion extends beyond reaching out to women and people from underrepresented groups, which we do, but it's also the reason that I stand before you today. Late last fall, Jan suggested that Hoodie ought to have an editorial team for their open source project. This would be a group responsible for the overall project communication. The other maintainers at the time expressed strong support for the idea, so a recruiting/invitational issue was created on GitHub. 11 people responded to the issue, which doesn't sound like a lot of respondents, but for an open source project to get 11 unique comments to a recruiting drive for volunteer work is a pretty positive response. We set up a meeting via Google Hangouts that coincided with a local meetup in New York City, which is super convenient because I live there, so I was really excited to be able to attend both. Speaking of, there's another thing that I love about Hoodie, which is not only have I always been enthusiastically welcomed, but I have a small person, and she has always also been enthusiastically welcomed. I can't talk. Blah. So I would just like to say more of that in tech, please. Okay, so take a quick drink. Editorial team, take 1. The response after our meeting was inspiring. Writers, editors, documentation writers, social media managers, event coordinators, and even some plain old coders responded to the call for an editorial team. Takeaway number 1. The early days of the editorial team suffered from too many cooks syndrome. That's me singing Too Many Cooks from Too Many Cooks last year. I don't know if you guys saw Too Many Cooks, but I was really into it. We had a lot of enthusiastic folks with a lot of opinionated opinions, which resulted in some fruitful, some laborious discussions on GitHub. It also resulted in some people being turned off from the idea entirely, which is unfortunate. Without a clear leader to facilitate, any conflict that would happen in GitHub would basically bring any discussion to a standstill. And that's where the editorial team stayed throughout Christmas and the following month. We had a lot of eager volunteers and a lot of ideas and a lot of discussion, and that was it. So, editorial team, take 2. My schedule kind of freed up a lot this year, and I was looking to join a team. Hoodie appealed to me because it was A, run by people I admire, and B, making a concerted effort to include people not usually even thought of in tech, who I like to call communicators. I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. That's me being excited to share secrets. The tech industry isn't only exciting and open source, isn't only exciting and interesting to coders. The correlation is made slightly easier, but technology is exciting with its innovation and rapid-fire rate of product delivery. But it can be hard to break into if you're not a coder, or I mean, even if you're a coder. Like every opportunity is for 10 plus years of React, and or if you're looking for a marketing person, it's like a position that's like half office manager, half marketing manager, half content strategist, half event planner, half lunch fetcher, half graphic design skills a plus position. So, yeah. When Hoodie announced that they were looking for people exactly like me, I was stoked. I went to the meetup in New York, and I participated in the Google Hangout and the subsequent GitHub threads. And then when it all slowed to a halt, I wasn't sure what to do next. You see, I had been a manager of creative talent in my last role, so when my managerial instincts, they were there throughout all of this happening, I was unfamiliar with the power dynamics of open source projects and also the pacing. But something that I've learned and heard throughout my whole life is that it only takes one. So after waiting on the project for a couple of months, I finally reached out to Jan and Gregor and asked if it would be okay for me to contact the other volunteers. My thinking was to find out who was interested in which elements of the project, enable them to do those parts of the project, and then just see where it went from there. It wasn't until we had a point person actively engaging folks that they began to then actively engage with the project. So that's my second takeaway from this experience, is that communication is key, and staying on top of it with all of your contributors is hugely powerful. People aren't going to spend their spare time in this mortal coil on something that's not welcoming, hard to understand, or hard to get started. And for all its many blessings, GitHub is not very intuitive for folks outside of code, so we had to get creative with it. I wrote a blog post about the team. Jan and I went on a podcast to talk about why we were doing the editorial team and how people could get involved. I went to meetups and talked to every person who would listen about this idea of welcoming non-coding contributors. So one thing I also did was rewrite the editorial repository's README with every helpful detail I could think of without being overwhelming, I hope. I set up a weekly Google Hangout for contributors to either catch up or for new folks to see a friendly face and ask questions. And for a time, people got excited, and they got busy, and they got involved, and it was awesome. Which leads me to takeaway number 3, which is 3 different things, actually. Recruiting is hard, retention is hard, and doing brand new things is super hard. So when I originally reached out to give this talk, that's me being so excited to give a talk at CascadiaJS. When I reached out, it was during this booming period of having a lot of active contributors, and I assumed back then that by August I'd have this plethora of success stories and lessons learned to share with you, and you could tweet about them, and everybody would have a great time. But I don't. The reality is that things have slowed way down. Some folks contribute regularly, like our TGIF editor, who's also a full-time librarian, Cecily. Some folks contribute regularly for a season when they have spare time, and some folks just contribute once and then decide to move on. So consistency outside of a few individuals is really an issue, and I personally struggled to keep up the energy to recruit new contributors all of the time. That's why it's awesome to be a part of a project like Hoodie that has great teammates like Gregor, who's probably, if you haven't met him yet, one of the most energetic people I have ever known. Another thing that came up was recruiting folks outside of tech to work within the tech industry without any prior knowledge can be somewhat of a significant hurdle sometimes. Also, recruiting folks to do something in their something for free in their spare time can be interesting. For writers and contributors interested in technical writing or beginning to code, the advantages of working on a project like Hoodie seems obvious, but finding great communicators, visual artists, community builders, and project managers is hard work. And I haven't figured out the secret to be able to share it with you here today. Maybe I will read the secret, and then we'll all do this again next year, and I'll have a lot better answers for you. We as a project are making efforts to be able to incentivize contributors through programs like Open Collective and by applying for grants to help fund Hoodie. But like Gregor mentioned in his talk on Wednesday, money and open source mixed together can be really tricky. So what I do know and what I can share with you today is that it's absolutely worth it. Whenever I get discouraged about the adventure of the editorial team, I think back to this fall and to the way that I felt reading that editorial issue from Jan. I remember the excitement that I felt that he was, for the first time ever, definitely describing a type of contributor who I completely identified with. And this was the first time that it had happened in 5 years of being in tech. So that excitement and belonging I felt back in the fall encourages me to keep putting the feelers out there for Hoodie, because I know there are folks out there who are interested, and I know that they will absolutely help Hoodie, and they will help make Hoodie and open source better through their contributions. But we just haven't figured out a way to reach them yet. So I want to quickly say thank you for listening. And if you know somebody who would like to talk about contributing to Hoodie, please come and find me. Or if you have ideas for recruiting non-coding contributors, I would love to talk to you. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Jenn.